The salt flats of Vaston 3 stretched into blinding nothing. White, cracked, endless, Reed Calver had crossed them 17 times in 4 years, hauling cargo for the Meridian convoys, and he'd learned to read the signs. The air tasted metallic. The horizon shimmered wrong. Pressure built behind his eyes like a fist closing. Storm coming. The kind that stripped flesh from bone. He should have turned back 2 hours ago, but the shelter beacon had been pinging on his wrist scanner since dawn. Automated distress, probably some idiot prospector who'd wandered too far from the trade routes. Reed had ignored 7 of those calls in the past month. Bodies didn't pay. But something about this one nagged at him. The signal pattern was irregular, cycling on and off like someone was trying to conserve power, like someone was still alive. The wind picked up, carrying granules of salt that stung his exposed cheeks. He pulled his respirator higher and pushed toward the half-buried cargo shelter. A rusted metal box, half swallowed by white crust, its emergency light blinking red through the gathering haze. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. Reed's hand moved to the plasma cutter on his belt, instinct. In the flats, shelters attracted more than refugees. Scavengers, cannibals, worse things. He stepped inside. The interior was cold as vacuum. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly blue. Scattered supplies, medical packs torn open, empty water tubes, blood on the floor. Fresh blood. Reed's eyes adjusted. 2 silhouettes huddled in the corner. The larger one lay motionless on the ground, blue skin visible through torn clothing. Alien. Kalashi, maybe. He'd seen a few in the northern settlements. Refugees from the mining wars. This one was maybe 15, 16 standard years, unconscious, breathing shallow. The smaller figure moved. A child. Kalashi, child. No more than 8 years old. Barefoot, wearing rags that might have once been a thermal suit. Her skin was darker blue than her sister's, mottled with cold. She held something in her trembling hands, a weapon cobbled together from rebar and scrap metal, sharp enough to kill if she got lucky. Reed raised his hands slowly, palms out. The child charged. No hesitation, no warning, just raw survival instinct compressed into 30 kilograms of desperate fury. She was fast, faster than she should have been in her condition, and the improvised spear came up at his throat with shocking precision. The tip pressed against his pulse point. She was shaking so hard the metal vibrated against his skin, but her eyes were steady. Feral. Certain. "Touch my sister," she hissed, voice cracking from dehydration and cold, "and you will sleep forever." Outside, the wind shifted. Reed heard the howl change pitch, deeper, angrier. The temperature in the shelter dropped 5 degrees in as many seconds. A sandstorm slammed into the shelter's eastern wall with the force of an explosion. The whole structure shuddered. Dust and salt crystals rained from the ceiling joints. The storm had hit early. They were trapped. Reed kept his hands raised, his voice low and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you. You came for our packs." The child spat, eyes flicking to a corner where 2 weathered supply bags sat. Probably everything they owned in the world. "Everyone comes for our packs." The spear pressed harder. A bead of blood welled where the tip broke his skin. "My name is Reed. I'm a runner for the Meridian convoys. I saw the distress beacon." Liar. Her chin trembled, but her stance didn't waver. She'd positioned herself between Reed and the unconscious girl, angling her body so he'd have to go through her first. "You're human. Humans don't help, Kalashi. You trade us. Sell us to the labor camps. I've seen the cages in your transport ships." Reed glanced past her at the older sister. Loom. He'd heard the child whisper the name earlier. The girl's lips had gone from blue to grey. Her chest barely moved. Hypothermia, late stage. Maybe minutes left. "Your sister is freezing to death," Reed said quietly. "She won't make it through the next hour without heat." The child's eyes widened, just for a second before the wall went back up. "Don't talk about her. You don't look at her," Reed interrupted, voice harder now. "Look." The child didn't turn. Wouldn't take her eyes off him, but her jaw clenched and Reed saw the knowledge there. The terrible awareness she'd been fighting since he walked in. Her sister was dying. Another gust hammered the shelter. The door groaned against its remaining hinge. Through the gaps, Reed could see the storm wall, a churning white hell that turned air into knives. Visibility was already 0. The temperature would hit -30 within the hour. They had 2 choices: share body heat or freeze separately. The child's spear wavered just slightly. Her small hands were so cold she could barely grip the weapon. Reed moved slowly, deliberately. He unclasped his thermal cloak, military grade, worth more than a month's pay, and let it drop to the floor between them. Then he stepped back, hands still raised. "Wrap her in it yourself," he said. "I won't touch her." The child stared at the cloak like it might be poisoned. Her breathing quickened, panic starting to crack through the survivor shell. She was what, 8? 9? Too young to carry this alone, too young to watch her sister die. Why? The word came out broken. "Why would you—" "Because she's dying," Reed said simply. "And you know it." The child's face crumpled. For one terrible moment, she looked exactly like what she was, a terrified little girl holding a useless weapon against a universe that wanted her dead. Then the mask slammed back down, harder than before. She lunged for the cloak, dragging it back to her sister, without turning her back on Reed. The spear stayed in one hand. Her movements were jerky, desperate. She wrapped the thermal fabric around Loom's shaking form, tucking it tight around her shoulders and legs. It wouldn't be enough. Reed could see that from here. The older girl's core temperature had dropped too far. The cloak would slow the process, not stop it. The shelter creaked. A support beam somewhere in the ceiling groaned under stress. "She's not warming up," the child whispered, hand pressed against Loom's forehead, then her neck, searching for heat that wasn't there. Why isn't she?" "The cloak can't generate heat," Reed said. "It can only hold what's already there, and she doesn't have enough left." The child looked up at him and Reed saw the exact moment she understood. Her sister needed more than fabric. She needed warmth, living warmth. "No," the child said, but there was no force behind it, just desperation. "No, I won't let you—" "Her heart is slowing," Reed said, keeping his voice clinical. Matter of fact, emotion would break her. Facts might save them. When Kalashnikor temperature drops below critical threshold, cardiac function degrades. She's maybe 10 minutes from system failure. Don't say that. The spear came up again, but the child's hand was shaking too hard to aim. "Don't you dare! She's not! She won't!" Loom's breathing hitched. Once, twice, then stopped for a 3 count that felt like falling off a cliff. The child screamed her sister's name. Reed crossed the distance in 2 strides. The spear jabbed at his throat, but Reed caught the child's wrist. Not hard, just firm. Enough to redirect the blade. She fought him, kicking, scratching, making sounds that weren't quite words. "Listen to me," he said, his face inches from hers. "Listen, your sister needs body heat, shared warmth. It's the only thing that will keep her alive until the storm passes. You'll hurt her. I won't," Reed said. "But if you don't, let me help. She dies. Right now, right here, you choose." The child went rigid. Her eyes were wild, darting between Reed's face and her sister's prone form. Loom had started breathing again, but the intervals were wrong, too shallow, too far apart. "How do I know?" the child whispered. "How do I know you won't—" "You don't." Reed released her wrist and stepped back. "But you're out of options." The silence stretched. Outside, the storm howled like something alive and hungry. Inside, Loom's breathing rattled in her chest. The child looked at her sister, at Reed, at the spear in her trembling hand, then she lowered the weapon. "If you hurt her," she said, and her voice had gone quiet and flat and infinitely more dangerous than before, "I will find a way to make you suffer. I don't care how small I am, I will make you scream," Reed believed her. He sat down on the cold floor back against the wall and reached for Loom carefully, giving the child time to react. When no spear came, he pulled the older girl against his chest, positioning her so his body heat would transfer most efficiently. Core to core, the way survival training had drilled into him years ago. The child watched, her whole body coiled tight, ready to strike. "Come here," Reed said gently. "Body heat transfers better with surface contact on both sides." "Like a thermal sandwich," the child finished, voice small. "Loom taught me, back when we had thermal suits that worked." She moved forward, hesitant. Each step a negotiation between hope and terror. Finally, she crawled in, pressing herself against her sister's back, completing the triangle of warmth. For the first time since Reed had entered the shelter, the spear touched the ground. They sat like that, 3 bodies sharing heat in the dark. Loom's breathing began to even out. Color, slowly, agonizingly slowly crept back into her lips. The child's own shivering started to ease as warmth transferred through the layers. Minutes passed. The storm raged outside. "My name is Sierra," the child said suddenly. "You were right, she was dying." Her voice cracked. "Thank you." Reed didn't answer, didn't know how. He'd spent 4 years running cargo across Vaston 3, keeping his head down, asking no questions, forming no attachments. "The flats taught you that caring about people got you killed, so why had he walked into this shelter?" Sierra shifted against her sister's back, and Reed felt the small tremor that ran through her. Not cold, something else. "Why are you helping us?" she whispered. Reed stared at the far wall, at the shadows cast by the failing emergency lights. He thought about the children he'd seen in cages at the labor depots, blue-skinned, broken, sold. "I don't know," he said finally. Sierra was quiet for a long moment. Then, "In the camps, the humans told us our people were vermin, worthless." Reed said nothing. "But Loom never believed them," Sierra continued. "She said some humans were different, that we just had to survive long enough to find them." She laughed, bitter and far too old for her age. "I thought she was stupid." "Maybe she was right," Reed said. Before Sierra could answer, something scraped against the shelter's outer wall. Soft, deliberate. Not wind. Reed's hand moved to his belt. He froze, listened. The scraping stopped. Silence pressed down like weight. Then, from somewhere in the storm, a low vibration rolled through the metal frame. Too rhythmic to be natural, too patient to be random. Something was testing the shelter, searching for a way in. The wind outside had been a constant roar for the past 20 minutes, a wall of sound that battered the walls and leaked through every gap. But now it was louder, deeper, not the wind, something else. A low, resonant groan rolled through the storm, metal scraping against metal, deliberate, searching. Reed's blood went cold. Sierra went rigid against her sister. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." "What is it?" Reed whispered. But Sierra's face had gone blank with animal terror, and Reed understood before she could answer. Something had found them. Something that hunted in the storms. The metallic groan came again. "Closer, white crawler," Sierra breathed. "They feel vibrations, smell blood." Reed's eyes snapped to the dark stain where Loom had been lying. Fresh blood. A beacon. "Don't move," he mouthed. Sierra nodded, hand clamped over Loom's mouth. The scraping moved along the eastern wall. Slow. Testing. Reed could picture it. Massive, pale, evolved for the flats. Blind scavengers with armor thick enough to shrug off plasma fire. They fed on anything organic. The scraping stopped. Silence. Reed counted heartbeats. 10, 20. The entire shelter shook as something slammed into the northern wall. Sierra jerked but didn't scream. Bit down on her own hand instead. Loom stirred. Waking, and Sierra pressed her face against her chest, muffling sound. Another impact. Rivets popped. The door shifted inward 6 inches. Through the gap, Reed saw it, flash of white, textured like bone. A sensory tendril snaked through, swaying, tasting their presence. The crawler knew. It was deciding how to get in. Reed grabbed. The steel rod near the entrance, his only weapon against something that size. Like fighting a tank with a pocket knife. The tendril withdrew. The creature backed up, weight shifting on salt crust outside, going to ram the door. Reed positioned himself between the door and the girls. Weight on his toes. "When it breaks through," he whispered, "you run behind me." You'll die, Sierra said. Maybe. The scraping stopped. The world held its breath. The crawler charged. The impact was catastrophic. The door exploded inward in a spray of metal fragments and crystallized salt. The creature came with it. 6 meters of pale, segmented nightmare. Its had a mass of grinding mandibles and empty sensory pits. It moved with horrible speed, for something so large, multiple legs scrabbling for purchase on the shelter floor. Reed swung the steel rod at its head. Connected. The impact jarred his arms, but barely registered to the creature. It turned toward him, mandibles spreading, rows of serrated teeth designed to crush bone. He swung again, missed. The crawler's front leg caught him in the chest and sent him flying. He hit the far wall. Stars exploded in his vision. His weapon clattered away, through. The ringing in his ears, he heard Sierra scream, not in fear, in rage. Reed's vision swam, copper in his mouth. Something in his chest, rib, cracked. He tried to push up. His arms wouldn't cooperate. The crawler turned toward Loom, drawn by her. Blood. Sierra stood in front of her sister. Impossibly small. She held her tiny spear in both hands. No, Reed tried to shout, came out as a wheeze. Sierra, run! She didn't run. She charged. The child launched herself at 6 meters of armored death, with nothing but sharpened rebar and absolute certainty she would not let her sister die. She was too small to reach its head, so she went for its legs, jamming the spear into the joint where chitin met soft tissue. The crawler shrieked like tearing metal and reared back. One leg caught Sierra and sent her tumbling, but she'd already scrambled up, moving again, drawing the creature away from Loom. Reed found his feet. Vision cleared enough to see the plasma cutter on his belt. He yanked it free, thumbed the ignition. Thin blue beam whining to life. He lunged. The crawler, focused on Sierra, didn't see Reed until he jammed the cutter into soft tissue behind its head. The beam burned through. The creature convulsed. One mandible caught Reed's shoulder and tore, but he held on, twisting deeper. Superheated ichor sprayed across his arms. The crawler thrashed, back toward the entrance, and the floor cracked. Not just cracked, collapsed. Reed saw the fissure open like a mouth, gap in the salt crust beneath the shelter. The storm had been eroding the foundation. The crawler's weight was the final stress. The creature plunged through with a final shriek, its legs scrabbling, tearing chunks of metal. The shelter's frame tilted. Reed grabbed Sierra's arm as she started to slide. She grabbed Loom with her other hand. For a terrible moment, all three hung there, the abyss yawning beneath, cold white nothing waiting. Reed's boots found a support beam. He hauled back with everything he had. They collapsed in a heap against the far wall as the shelter groaned and settled at a 30-degree angle. Silence, except for wind and ragged breathing. Sierra shook violently. Adrenaline crash, survival shock. She'd charged a creature 10 times her size. She was 8 years old. Her tiny spear lay between them, one end dark with the crawler's blood. She picked it up, turned it over, then slowly pressed the blunt end against Reed's chest. Not in threat. In something else. In our clans, Sierra whispered. A spear marks who we trust with our life. Behind her, Loom stirred, eyes fluttered open, clouded but conscious. She saw Sierra, saw Reed, saw the fissure, the floor. It's not stable, Loom rasped. The shelters... Reed heard it before she finished, groan from below, salt crust fracturing, breaking away in sheets. The storm had been eating the ground and the crawler's thrashing had accelerated collapse. The shelter was sinking into the white. We have to move, Reed said. Now. Loom couldn't walk. Reed swung her onto his back in one motion. Hold on, don't let go. Her arms locked around his neck. She weighed almost nothing. Sierra grabbed their supply packs, slinging one over each. Shoulder, nearly as large as she was, but she didn't hesitate. She kept her spear in one hand. The shelter listed another 5 degrees. Metal screamed. Through the broken door, Reed saw the storm still raging, but the wall had thinned. The eye passing over. Maybe 10 minutes before the back edge hit. Stay close, Reed said. You can't see me. Grab my belt. Sierra nodded, face blank. Survival mode. They stepped into the white hell. Wind hit like a physical force, shoving Reed sideways. He leaned into it, one arm wrapped around Loom's legs. Salt crystals scoured exposed skin. Each breath burned. Sierra pressed against his left side, small hand gripping his belt. She held the spear like a talisman. Reed's compass gave false readings, magnetic interference. He switched to dead reckoning, following the land slope uphill where the crust was older, stable. Behind them, the shelter groaned once and collapsed into the fissure. The sound swallowed by wind. They walked, minutes, hours. Reed lost track. His shoulder, where the crawler had torn him, felt like liquid fire. Loom's weight pressed on damaged ribs. Each step was negotiation between forward, momentum, and collapse. Sierra never faltered, never complained, just kept her death grip on his belt and matched his pace. The storm cleared slowly, then faster. Wind dropped. Visibility expanded. Salt flats spread before them, endless and white and empty. Reed's scanner started working. 3 kilometers from the nearest ridge, 3 kilometers where the next storm could catch them, but the ridge meant shelter, real shelter, natural caves in rock formations, safety. Keep moving, he told Sierra. We're close. You said that an hour ago, she said. No accusation, just observation. This time I mean it. They crested a low rise, and there it was. Ridgeline cutting across white expanse like a scar. Dark stone. Safety. Reed's legs chose that moment to give out. He went down hard, managing to twist so Loom wouldn't hit ground. She rolled off his back with a small cry. Sierra was there immediately, checking her sister. I'm fine, Reed said, pushing to his knees. Just need... You're bleeding, Sierra interrupted. She pointed at his shoulder, where the crawler's mandible had torn through. His entire left side was dark with blood. It's not that bad, liar. But Sierra was already digging through the supply pack, pulling out a medical kit. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. She sprayed coagulant on the wound, packed it with synthetic bandage, wrapped it tight. The pain clarified Reed's thoughts. We need the ridge before dark, he said. Temperature drops fast. Then get up. Sierra stood, offering her small hand. We're not dying today. Reed took her hand, let her pull him to his feet. The gesture was absurd. She couldn't possibly support his weight, but he rose anyway. They reached the ridge as sun touched the horizon, painting white flats in shades of pink and gold and blood. Reed found a cave, narrow entrance, deep interior, dry. He collapsed against the back wall. Loom lay beside him, breathing steady, color almost normal. Sierra arranged supplies, rationed water, checked the perimeter like a soldier. When she finished, she sat cross-legged near the cave mouth, spear across. Her knees watching. Sleep, Reed told her. I'll keep watch. You can barely sit up. Then we'll both watch. Sierra turned to look at him in fading light. Her eyes were ancient. You really don't know, do you? Know what? Why you helped us. She tilted her head. You keep saying you don't know, but I think you're lying. Reed said nothing. Sierra stood, walked over to him, barely reached his chest even when he was sitting. She placed the butt of her spear on the ground beside his hand. A gesture Reed didn't understand, but felt in his bones. You carried her through the white hell, Sierra said softly. And me. Even when I wanted you dead. I told you. No. She shook her head. You did it because no one ever carried you. The words hit harder than the crawler had. Reed felt something crack in his chest. Not a rib. Something deeper. Something he'd spent 4 years building walls around. He'd been alone since the colony. Wars. Since he'd watched his unit burn while he was off-planet. Since he'd learned that attachment meant grief, and grief meant weakness. So he'd stopped caring. Stopped connecting. Become a runner, anonymous, invisible, untouchable, until a distress beacon pinged. Until a child pressed a spear to his throat. Until he made a choice. Sierra touched the spear to his shoulder lightly, gently, protectively. In our clans, she said. When you save someone's life, they become your family, even if you're not the same blood, even if you're not the same species. Reed looked at her. At Loom, sleeping peacefully. At the spear, crude weapon made from scraps, carried with more honor than any blade he'd seen. I don't have a family, he said. You do now. Sierra sat beside him, back against the cave wall, matching his posture. Whether you want one or not. Outside, first stars emerged over white flats. The storm had passed. Temperature would drop soon, but they had shelter, water, each other. Reed closed his eyes. For the first time in 4 years, he wasn't alone. Dawn came soft and cold. Reed woke to find Loom sitting up, color fully restored, drinking water. Sierra was already awake, probably hadn't slept, maintaining her vigil at the cave entrance. Morning, Loom said, voice rough but strong. She studied Reed with calm, intelligent eyes. Sierra told me what you did. Thank you. Reed shrugged. Wasn't... Don't, Loom interrupted gently. Don't minimize it. You stayed. You fought. You carried us. She glanced at her sister. She trusts you. That's not something Sierra gives easily. She's... brave, Reed said. She's terrified, Loom smiled sadly. But she's brave anyway. That's the only kind that matters. They shared the last of their food, protein bars that tasted like cardboard. Reed checked his scanner. Nearest convoy waypoint is 40 kilometers northeast, he said. A day's walk on the flats. I can get you to the waypoint. There's a refugee processing center there. No. Sierra's voice was flat. Absolute. No camps. No processing. No cages. It's not like that, Reed said. But he heard the lie. Loom put a hand on her sister's shoulder. We've been in the camps, she said quietly. The humans call them refugee centers, but we've seen the cargo holds. The auction. Lots. Reed knew, everyone knew. The labor shortage on outer colonies was filled by bodies from somewhere. Economics. Nobody asked too many questions. Then where will you go? He asked. Sierra and Loom exchanged a look. Silent communication that only happened between people who'd survived together. There's a settlement, Loom said, in the north. Free Kalashi, independent. She pulled a small data chip from inside her shirt. Our mother gave us coordinates before she died, said if we could reach it, we'd be safe. How far? 500 kilometers, through the deep flats. Reed whistled low. That's 3 weeks on. Foot, in the deep flats. He stopped. No point listing all the ways they'd die. We'll make it, Sierra said. With luck, Reed said, with stubbornness. Sierra's mouth quirked. We're very stubborn. Reed looked at them. 2 orphans with a data chip and a dream, heading into the deadliest terrain on Vaston 3. They'd last maybe a week. He thought about the convoy masters waiting for his next run. The credits accumulating. The simple, anonymous life he'd built. He thought about 4 years of running. I know a route, he heard himself say. Through the canyons. Avoids most of the deep flats. Cuts the distance to maybe 400 kilometers. Still dangerous, but better odds. Sierra's eyes widened. You're coming with us. Someone has to keep you alive. Reed stood, testing his injured shoulder. Still painful, but functional. And, I know the terrain, you don't. We can't pay you, Loom said softly. Didn't ask you to. Sierra looked at her spear, at Reed. Then she did something unexpected. She held the weapon out to him, horizontal, both hands supporting it. In our clans, she said, when you join a family, you share weapons, so you can protect each other. Reed stared at the crude spear. Then slowly, carefully, he drew his plasma cutter and laid it across his palms the same way. They exchanged weapons. The spear was lighter than he expected, unbalanced, fragile. But when he gripped it, he felt the weight of what it represented. Trust, earned in blood and storm and survival. Sierra held the plasma cutter like it was made of glass. She turned it over, studying it. Then she looked up at Reed with fierce determination. Teach me, she said. Teach me to fight, to survive, to protect Loom, she paused. Teach me to be like you. I'm not, Reed started, then stopped. Looked at this child who'd charged a crawler without hesitation, who'd kept her sister alive through things that would break most adults. Okay, he said. I'll teach you. They walked north. Sun climbed higher, warming the salt flats until they shimmered. Reed set a steady pace. Sierra walked beside him, asking questions about the terrain, weather patterns, how to read the salt crust for the weak spots. Loom walked behind them, stronger now but still recovering. Quiet and watchful. Reed answered every question, showed her how to test ground with her spear before committing weight, how to navigate by sun when scanners failed, how to spot thermal vents that meant unstable ground beneath. "Why do you know all this?" Sierra asked. "Were you born here?" "No, I came here after—" Reed caught himself. "After the war, needed somewhere far from everything." "You wanted to disappear," Loom said from behind them. Not a question. Yes. Did it work? Reed looked at Sierra, at the spear she'd given him, now strapped across his back. At Loom, alive because he'd chosen to answer a distress beacon. "No," he said. "I don't think it did." They walked in comfortable silence, the kind that forms between people who've survived something together, who've made choices that mattered. Hours passed. The landscape changed. Pure white salt giving way to minerals, traces of rust red and deep blue streaking through the crust. Canyon country, dangerous terrain, but faster. Reed checked his scanner. 40 kilometers behind them, 460 to go, a long journey. But for the first time in 4 years, Reed wasn't walking alone. The sun began its descent, painting long shadows. Reed called a halt near rock formations, ancient stone worn smooth, offering windbreak and concealment. Sierra dropped her packs and immediately began checking the perimeter, plasma cutter ready. Reed watched her move, already more confident, already internalizing the lessons. Loom settled against a rock, breathing slightly labored, still weak, but her eyes tracked everything. "We'll camp here tonight," Reed said. "Move at first light." They ate in silence. Protein bars, water purification, tablets making the brackish liquid almost drinkable. Not much, not enough for the journey ahead, but enough for tonight. As darkness fell, Loom spoke quietly. "Tell me about the settlement. Do you know it?" Reed hesitated. "I've heard rumors. Free Kalashi." 3 points of light appeared. Moving fast, ground vehicles, 6-wheeled transports, military grade. Floodlights swept the flats in wide arcs. "Searching." "Raiders," Sierra whispered. "Worse." Reed's jaw clenched. "Labor acquisition vehicles." "Corporate." "Security," Loom's hand went to her mouth. "They're hunting refugees." The vehicles spread out in a search pattern, methodical and efficient. Reed calculated distances, trajectories. The rocks provided concealment, but not cover. If those floodlights swept over their position, they'd be exposed, and the vehicles could move far faster than they could run. "We need to move," Reed said. "Now north toward the canyon rim." "They'll see us," Sierra protested. "Maybe, but staying here guarantees they find us." Reed was already grabbing packs, distributing weight. "Loom, can you run?" "I'll manage. That's not what I asked." Loom met his eyes. "I'll do what I have to." They moved out, keeping low, using scattered rock formations for cover. The floodlights continued their sweep behind them, methodical and relentless. Reed set a brutal pace, fast enough to create distance, controlled enough to minimize noise. Canyon rim was maybe 2 kilometers ahead. If they could reach it, descend. Into the canyon system, the vehicles couldn't follow. Too narrow, too steep, 50 meters, 100. 200. A floodlight swept left, passed over their position, and stopped. Reversed, locked on. "Run!" Reed shouted. They ran. Behind them, engines roared to life. Vehicles turned, accelerating. Floodlights blazed, turning night into day. Reed heard voices over loudspeakers, human voices, cold and professional. Targets acquired. 3 individuals, likely Kalashi refugees and 1 human accomplice. Initiating standard acquisition protocol. Accomplice. The word burned, but Reed had no time to process it. He grabbed Sierra's hand, pulling her faster. Loom kept pace, breath, ragged but stride steady. Canyon rim rushed toward them. Reed could see it now, dark line cutting across pale flats. Shadow and depth and safety. If they could just... The first vehicle cut them off. It came from the west, faster than Reed had calculated, skidding to a halt 30 meters ahead. Doors opened. 4 figures emerged, armored, armed, wearing corporate security insignia. Behind them, the other 2 vehicles closed in. surrounded. Reed pushed Sierra and Loom behind him, raising the spear. Beside him, Sierra activated the plasma cutter. Blue. Beam hummed to life, casting harsh shadows. "Weapon down!" the lead security officer called. "You're harboring contraband refugees. Surrender them now, and we'll process you as a witness rather than an accomplice." "They're children," Reed said. "They're property of the Colonial Labor Board until their debt status is resolved." The officer's voice was flat, bureaucratic. "Just another job. Last chance, weapon down." Reed looked at Sierra, at Loom, at the spear in his hands, crude thing made from scraps, carried by a child who trusted him with her life. He tightened his grip. "No," he said. The officer sighed. "Subdue and retrieve, non-lethal force authorized." The security team advanced. Shock batons, net launchers, tools for capturing without killing. Dead refugees had no value. Reed charged the nearest one. The spear wasn't designed for combat. Too light, too flexible, but desperation made up for poor craftsmanship. Reed drove the point toward the officer's armored chest, knowing it wouldn't penetrate, just needing space. Disruption. Chaos. The officer blocked with his baton. Reed twisted, used the spear shaft to hook behind the officer's knee. Yanked hard. The officer went down. Plasma fire blazed beside Reed. Sierra had engaged another officer, blue beam scoring black marks across armor. Not enough to penetrate, but enough to make him retreat. "Loom! Run!" Sierra screamed. "Get to the canyon!" But Loom didn't run. She grabbed loose rocks, hurling them with surprising accuracy. One caught an officer in the exposed throat. He staggered, gasping, 3 against 6. No chance. But Reed hadn't survived 4 years in the flats by accepting odds. He rolled under. A net launcher's trajectory came up inside another officer's guard, drove his elbow into the gap between helmet and chest plate. The officer stumbled. Reed grabbed his shock baton as it fell, spun, slammed it into the next attacker's knee joint. Beside him, Sierra fought like something feral, all teeth and claws and blue plasma fire. Too small, too weak. But she moved like water, never where. They expected. For 30 seconds, they held. Then the lead officer drew a different weapon. Not a baton, not a net launcher. A pulse rifle. "Enough," he said coldly. "Next person who moves gets a neural shock that'll leave them twitching for a week, and we'll still take the refugees." Reed froze. Sierra stopped mid-swing. Loom let the rock in her hand drop. The officer's rifle swept across them. "Enil, hands behind your heads, now." Reed calculated one last desperate move. Charge the rifle. Give the girls time to run. Then Loom spoke. "Wait." Her voice was calm, almost serene. She stepped forward, hands raised peacefully. "Take me," she said. "I'm the one with registered labor debt. She's a minor, legally exempt from forced placement, and he's just a runner who made a mistake." She looked at Reed, at Sierra. "Let them go. I'll come willingly." "Loom, no." Sierra's voice broke. "It's better this way." Loom smiled sadly at her sister. "You know it is. You're too young. They can't legally process you. But me." She turned, back to the officer. "I'll cooperate. No resistance. Just let them walk away." The officer considered. Economics. One cooperative refugee versus a prolonged struggle that might damage merchandise. "Acceptable," he said. "Restrain her. The others have 60 seconds to leave before we change our minds." 2 officers moved forward, with mag restraints. Loom extended her wrist calmly. Sierra made a sound Reed had never heard from her, part scream, part sob, entirely broken. She lunged toward her sister, but Reed caught her, held her back even as she fought him with everything. She had. No, you can't, Loom." "Live," Loom said softly, eyes locked on her sister. "Promise me, live and be free." The restraints clicked shut. They dragged Loom toward the vehicle. Reed pulled Sierra back, step by agonizing step, toward the canyon. Rim. She fought him the whole way, screaming her sister's name, but Reed held tight. Because this was what Loom wanted. This was the sacrifice she'd chosen. The security team loaded Loom into the transport, doors sealed, engines engaged. 10 seconds, the officer called. Then we reconsider our arrangement. Reed reached the canyon rim. The drop was steep but manageable. Loose scree and rock faces with handholds. Below, darkness and safety. He looked at Sierra. Her face was wet with tears, twisted with anguish. She still held the plasma cutter. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. Her hand trembled on the weapon. Blue light flickered across her face, 8 years old and holding a choice. Stay and die fighting, or run and live. Her fingers tightened on the grip. Don't, Reed said quietly, not for her. Sierra's hand went slack. The plasma cutter nearly slipped from her grip. Then she did something that broke him. She pressed the weapon into his palm, closing his fingers around it. Giving back what he'd given her, trusting him to carry what she couldn't. She's gone, Sierra whispered. I let them take her. You survived, Reed said. That's what she wanted. Time's up, the officer called. Reed didn't wait. He grabbed Sierra and jumped. They hit the scree slope hard, sliding and tumbling down into the canyon's darkness. Rocks tore at clothes and skin. Reed wrapped himself around Sierra, taking the impact on his back and shoulders. They hit bottom in a cloud of dust. In pain, above floodlights swept the canyon rim. Voices shouted, but the vehicles couldn't follow. And pursuit on foot into unknown canyon terrain at night was too risky for a single recovered refugee. Economics again. The lights withdrew. The engines faded. Silence. Reed lay on his back, staring, up at stars visible through the canyon opening. Every part of him hurt. Beside him, Sierra curled into a ball. She didn't cry like a child cries. She broke like glass. Quiet, sharp, too old. Her whole body shook. Her hands pressed against her mouth, trying to hold the sound in, but it escaped anyway. Small, broken gasps that had nowhere else to go. Reed wanted to tell her it would be okay. That they'd get Loom back. That this wasn't forever. But he'd already... light enough. So he sat up, ribs shrieking in protest, and pulled Sierra against his chest. She fought him for half a second, then collapsed completely, her small frame racked with shudders. Breathe, Reed said quietly. Sierra, breathe, she gasped, like drowning, in, hold out. She tried, failed. Her vision was going dark at the edges. He could see it in her eyes. Stay with me, Reed said, gripping her shoulders. Don't leave. Stay. She sucked in air. Once. Twice. The shaking began to slow. They sat like that. Reed, holding her together while she fell apart. Minutes passed. The stars wheeled overhead. Finally, Sierra's breathing steadied. Her body stopped shaking. She pulled back slightly, looking at Reed with eyes that were ancient and empty and too aware. She's gone, Sierra whispered. Reed nodded. I let them take her. You survived, Reed said. That's what she wanted. I don't want to survive. Not without her. Not alone. You're not alone. She looked at him like he'd spoken a language she didn't understand. Then exhaustion took her. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped against him. Unconscious. Reed caught her, checked her pulse, fast but steady. Shock finally claiming what grief couldn't. He laid her down gently, then checked their situation. The canyon was deep, dark. No obvious pursuit. But they'd lost the supply packs in the run, everything except what they carried. Reed had his belt tools. Sierra still had the plasma cutter clutched in one hand, even unconscious. No food, no water, no medical supplies. And his shoulder was bleeding again. Reed pressed his hand against the wound, feeling warm blood seep through his fingers. The infection would come back, probably worse this time. They had maybe 2 days before he couldn't walk anymore, and 400 kilometers still to go. 3 months later, Reed stood on the settlement's observation deck, watching the sunset over the canyon lands. His shoulder had healed, his ribs no longer ached. The fever dreams had finally stopped. Footsteps approached. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. They found her, Sierra said. Reed's heart stopped. Loom! They smuggled information out of the labor depot. She's alive, being held at a processing facility 200 kilometers south. Sierra moved beside him. The council is planning a rescue operation. 20 people. 2 weeks of planning. Dangerous. Silence stretched between them. Are you going? She asked. Reed looked at her, 8 years old, and asking if he'd risk his life again, asking without asking. What do you want? He said. Sierra was quiet. Then, I want my sister back. A pause. But I want you to come back too. Another pause. I don't know if I can have both. Reed turned to face her fully. She looked up at him, fierce, brilliant, broken, whole. The child who'd charged a crawler, who'd walked through the white hell, who'd chosen to save him when she could have let him die. You can, he said. I'm not running anymore. I go, I get her out, I come home. He put his hand on her shoulder. To you, to this place, I promise. Sierra's ancient eyes searched his face. Then she did something she'd never done before. She stepped forward, her arms barely reached around his waist, her face pressed against his chest. She held on. Don't break your promise, she whispered. Please, I can't lose anyone else. Reed wrapped his arms around her small frame. I won't, he said. I swear it. They stood there as the sun disappeared, painting the canyons in shades of red and gold. A man who'd stopped running. A child who'd learned to survive. Both finding something neither had expected, not bound by blood or species, but by choice, by sacrifice. By a spear offered in trust and accepted in return. By walking through the white hell together and choosing, again and again, not to let go. 2 weeks later, the rescue operation launched at dawn. Reed went with the team, 20 Kalashi soldiers, and 1 human runner who'd finally found something worth fighting for. They moved fast through the canyonlands, using routes only locals knew, avoiding corporate security patrols. The processing facility was a brutal concrete block rising from the salt flats, surrounded by walls, guarded by automated defenses and human security forces. Inside, hundreds of Kalashi refugees waited for processing. Loom was in Block 7, 4th floor, Cell 47. The team had planned for weeks. They knew guard rotations, weak points in the security, a grid, timing windows when shift changes created gaps. They went in at midnight. Reed moved with the assault team through underground maintenance tunnels. They'd disabled alarms 20 minutes ago. Security hadn't noticed yet. Block 7's entrance appeared ahead. Reed felt his heart hammering. He'd promised Sierra he'd come back, promised he'd bring Loom home. Time to keep those promises. The door breached. The team flowed inside. Cells lined both sides of the corridor. Kalashi refugees looked up with hollow eyes. Cell 47. Reed cut through the electronic lock with his plasma cutter. A new one, fully charged. The door slid open. Loom looked up from the narrow bench. 3 months in captivity had thinned her, bruised her, but her eyes were still clear. Still alive. She saw Reed and her expression shattered. You, she whispered. How? Your sister sent me, Reed said, extending his hand. Time to go home. Loom took his hand. They ran. The facility's alarms finally triggered as they hit the exit tunnel. Security forces mobilized, but the rescue team had planned for this. Diversions, barriers, chaos that bought precious seconds. They emerged into the salt flats at a dead run. Corporate security vehicles roared to life behind them, floodlights blazing. But the canyonlands were close. And in the canyons, locals had every advantage. They made it. Bleeding. Exhausted. But complete. Reed looked at Loom as they descended, into safe darkness. Sierra's waiting for you, he said. She never stopped believing we'd get you back. Loom's eyes filled with tears. I know, she whispered. That's what kept me alive. The settlement erupted when they returned. Sierra saw them coming from the observation deck. Reed watched her spot Loom in the group, watched her face transform, from tense, waiting to explosive joy. She was running before anyone could stop her. Sprinting down the canyon paths, leaping obstacles, moving with that feral speed. Loom. The scream echoed through canyons. Loom broke from the group, running to meet her sister. They collided in the middle of the path, Sierra launching herself into Loom's arms. both of them crying and laughing and holding on. Reed stopped walking. Let the moment belong to them. The rescue team moved past him toward the settlement, but Reed stayed where he was, watching two sisters reunited, watching the family he'd helped keep alive become whole. Sierra looked up from Loom's embrace. Her eyes found Reed's across the distance. Then she pulled Loom by the hand, running back to him. "You kept your promise," Sierra said, face streaked with tears but radiant. "You brought her home." "We brought her home," Reed corrected. "All of us." Loom stepped forward. She looked at Reed for a long moment. This human who'd answered a distress beacon, who'd fought. Beside them, who'd walked through hell to keep a promise. "Thank you," she said simply. "For my sister, for me." "I had good teachers," Reed said, glancing at Sierra. Sierra laughed, bright and clear and alive. She reached for her spear, the one she carried everywhere now. She held it horizontally between them. "In our clans," she said, "family shares everything. Pain, hope, weapons." She looked up at Reed. "You're our family now, not because you saved us." A pause. "Because you stayed." Another pause. "Because you chose us when you didn't have to." Reed took the spear, felt its familiar weight, saw the scratches and dents from their journey. From the crawler, from security forces, from 400 kilometers of survival. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm here." Loom put her hand on Sierra's shoulder. Sierra leaned against Reed's side. The three of them stood there as the settlement celebrated. A man who'd stopped running, a child who'd learned to survive, and a sister who'd come home. The sun set over the canyon lands, painting everything in gold. And for the first time in 4 years, Reed Calver felt home. That night, as the celebration wound down and the settlement settled into peaceful quiet, Reed found himself on the observation deck again. Stars blazed overhead, brilliant and cold and infinite. Footsteps approached. 2 sets this time. Sierra and Loom joined him at the railing, one on each side. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the night sky. "What happens now?" Sierra asked finally. Reed thought about the question, about convoys he'd never run again, about a life of solitude he'd left behind in a shelter on the White Flats. "Now we live," he said. "We build, we protect each other." A pause. "We're family." "Family," Sierra repeated, testing the word. "Family," Loom agreed, hand finding her sister's. Sierra's spear leaned against the railing beside them, crude and unbalanced and perfect. A weapon made from scraps that had become a symbol of trust, of survival, of love earned in the white hell. She picked it up, stepped forward, pressed the blunt end into the ground beside Reed's boot one last time. Not in threat, in protection. In promise, her tiny spear once guarded her sister, now guarded the man who'd walked through the storm for them, through the white hell and back again, together.